The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in March. I know the exact time because I was still awake reviewing case files for a property fraud hearing scheduled for the next morning. When you specialize in elder abuse and real estate fraud like I do, you learn that predators don't keep business hours. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number, middle of the night, usually spam or someone who dialed wrong. But something made me pick up. Hello? The sound that came through the phone will haunt me forever. It was my mother, but not my mother. This was a broken, terrified version of the woman who'd raised me. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand the words. Michael, you have to help me. He says the house is his now. He has papers, legal papers. He's making me leave. My blood went cold. Mom, slow down. Who's making you leave? What papers? Your brother. Her voice cracked on the words. Danny came over today with some man in a suit. They had documents. They said Dad and I signed the house over to him months ago as a gift, but I don't remember signing anything like that. I would never. This house is all we have. Has anyone here dealt with elder abuse? If you have, you'll understand the rage that started building in my chest. It's not just anger. It's a primal protective fury that makes your vision go red and your hands shake. Mom, where are you right now? We're at that awful little apartment complex on Elm Street. The one with the thin walls and no yard. Danny said we have to be out of the house by Friday so he can sell it. She started crying harder. He said he needs the money for his business. He said you'd understand because you're smart about these things. Smart about these things. Yeah, I was smart about these things, all right. Smart enough to know that what my brother had just pulled was textbook elder abuse. Smart enough to recognize the signs of deed fraud from 3,000 miles away. And smart enough to know that Danny had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Mom, listen to me carefully. Don't sign anything else. Don't talk to anyone else about this until I get there. I'm booking a flight right now. But Michael, he showed us the papers. They looked official. He said his lawyer friend prepared them and everything was legal. What if we really did sign it and just forgot? This is how predators operate. They isolate and confuse their victims. They use official-looking documents and authoritative language to make elderly people doubt their own memories. They prey on the natural trust between family members and exploit the cognitive changes that come with aging. Mom, I need you to trust me on this. Dad's memory might not be perfect anymore, but yours is sharp as ever. If you don't remember signing away your house, you didn't sign away your house. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been monitoring our family's property records for the past 8 months. Every deed transfer, every mortgage filing, every property tax change, I had alerts set up through the county recorder's office. Professional paranoia maybe, but when you've seen as many families destroyed by property theft as I have, you don't take chances. The notifications had been pinging my phone all day. Transfer of deed for 1247 Maple Street, the house where I'd grown up, where my parents had lived for 37 years. The house that was supposed to be their security in retirement. I'll be there tomorrow, I told her. Don't worry about the apartment rent or anything else. I'll handle everything. But what if you can't fix this? What if we really did lose the house? But as I listened to my mother cry, I wasn't panicking. I was smiling because I knew something my brother didn't. 6 hours later, I was on a plane from Seattle to Cleveland, my laptop bag stuffed with every piece of documentation I'd been quietly collecting about my family's finances. The flight gave me time to think about how we'd gotten here. Anyone else the forgotten child here? Then you'll understand what growing up in my house was like. Danny was always the golden child, 6 years older than me, captain of the football team, prom king, the guy everyone in our small Ohio town knew and loved. He had this effortless charisma that made people want to help him, want to be around him. Teachers gave him second chances, cops let him off with warnings, and our parents, well, they practically worshipped the ground he walked on. I was the quiet one. The bookworm who spent Friday nights studying instead of partying. While Danny was charming his way through high school and college, I was getting perfect grades that nobody seemed to notice. When he dropped out of college to start his first business venture, a food truck that failed within 6 months, my parents called it entrepreneurial spirit. When I graduated summa cum laude from law school, I got a card in the mail. The pattern continued into our adult lives. Danny stayed in our hometown, always visible, always present. He'd show up at family dinners with stories about his latest scheme, the car dealership that went under, the restaurant that never opened, the real estate flipping business that left him deeper in debt. But he was there, physically present, helping Dad with yard work and taking Mom grocery shopping. I was 3,000 miles away, building a career, building a life. I specialized in elder law because I'd seen too many families torn apart by financial abuse. Property fraud, in particular, had become my expertise. I could spot a forged deed from across a courtroom, identify the telltale signs of cognitive manipulation, and trace financial elder abuse through complex paper trails. My parents were proud of me, I think, but proud in that distant way parents are of children who've moved beyond their understanding. They'd tell their friends that Michael's a lawyer in Seattle, but they couldn't really explain what I did or why it mattered. What they didn't know was that for the past 3 years, I'd been quietly sending them money. Not enough that they'd notice, just covering the difference between their Social Security and their actual expenses. Property taxes that had gone up, prescription costs that Medicare didn't cover, home repairs they couldn't afford. I routed it through a trust account so it looked like insurance reimbursements or tax refunds. I'd also been monitoring their finances more closely than they knew. When you work in elder abuse, you develop an instinct for the warning signs. Danny's visits had become more frequent over the past year. He'd started showing up with complicated financial documents that needed signatures. He'd convinced them to add him to their checking account for emergencies. Classic grooming behavior. But I'd been watching. Every county record was public information if you knew where to look. Every property filing, every deed transfer, every lien or mortgage change. I had Google alerts set up for their address, their names, even Danny's name. Professional paranoia mixed with family protectiveness. The plane touched down in Cleveland at 2:30 p.m. I'd called in favors to clear my schedule for the next week, told my partners it was a family emergency. They didn't ask questions. In our line of work, we all understood that family emergencies involving elderly parents could get complicated fast. I drove straight to 1247 Maple Street. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. White clapboard siding that Dad painted every 3 years. Mom's flower garden in front, the old oak tree where Danny and I used to climb as kids. But Danny's truck was in the driveway, and there were moving boxes visible through the front windows. I knocked on the door of what used to be my childhood home. Danny answered, and the smug grin on his face told me everything I needed to know. Well, well, look who decided to visit the family. Little Mikey, coming back to the old neighborhood. Where are Mom and Dad, Danny? They're settled into their new place. Nice little apartment, much easier to maintain. You should be thanking me. I saved them from having to deal with all the upkeep on this old place. He gestured around the living room like he owned it, which, according to the documents I'd reviewed on the plane, he legally did as of yesterday at 3:47 p.m. when the deed transfer was recorded. Mind if I see those legal documents you showed them? Danny's grin got wider. Of course, counselor, though I'm sure you'll find everything in order. He pulled out a manila folder and handed me a set of papers with the casual confidence of someone who thought he'd covered all his bases. Warranty deed, notarized and recorded. Power of attorney documents. A carefully worded gift letter explaining that the property transfer was a voluntary gift from parents to child. I flipped through the pages, maintaining a neutral expression while my brain cataloged about 15 different legal violations and procedural errors. But I kept my face blank. Looks official, I said finally. Yep. My lawyer friend Dave Morrison handled all the paperwork. Everything's completely legal and above board. Danny was practically glowing with pride. I know this might be hard for you to understand, being so far away and all, but Mom and Dad wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family. And since I'm the one who's actually here, taking care of them, he let the implication hang in the air. The responsible son versus the absent son. The one who stayed versus the one who left. I assume you'll be putting it on the market soon? Already go. It's a buyer lined up. Cash deal closing next Friday. Should clear enough to pay off some debts and maybe get that business loan I've been working on. Something was very, very wrong. And in about 6 hours, Danny was going to find out exactly how wrong things could get. I found my parents at Sunset Manor Apartments, a depressing complex on the other side of town, where the walls were thin, the parking lot was cracked, and the smell of industrial disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying odor of despair. They were in Unit 4B, a 2-bedroom apartment that felt like a prison cell compared to the house they'd lived in for over 3 decades. Mom opened the door and I could see she'd been crying. Dad was sitting in his recliner, the one piece of furniture they'd managed to bring with them, staring at a TV that wasn't turned on. Michael, Mom threw her arms around me. I'm so glad you're here, but I don't know what you can do. Danny showed us all the papers. We must have signed them and forgotten. This is how predators operate. They isolate and confuse their victims. They make elderly people question their own memories, their own judgment. It's psychological manipulation disguised as helpful family assistance. Dad looked up when he heard my voice. His smile was weak, confused. Michael, what are you doing here? Is everything all right? I'm here to help, Dad. Can you tell me about the papers you and Mom signed? His face scrunched up in concentration. Papers? Danny brought some papers by. Said they were important. Something about the house? He looked at Mom for confirmation. I don't remember much about it. These days, my memory... Mom squeezed his hand. Danny said it was routine paperwork, estate planning stuff. He brought that lawyer friend of his, Dave something, and they explained it all. Said it would save on taxes when we pass away. Did you read the documents before you signed them? Well, they were very long and complicated. All that legal language, you know. Dave explained what they meant. He said it was just to make sure the house would go to Danny instead of going through probate, that it would save the family money. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Mom, I need you to think carefully. Do you remember specifically agreeing to give Danny the house while you're still alive? Not after you pass away, but right now? Give him the house now? She looked confused. Why would we do that? Where would we live? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I spent the next hour gently questioning them, recording everything. Neither of them had any memory of agreeing to an immediate transfer of the property. They'd been told they were signing estate planning documents that would take effect after their deaths. Classic bait and switch. Around 6 p.m., Danny showed up at the apartment, probably to check on his victims and make sure they weren't causing trouble. Mikey, still here? I figured you'd head back to your important life in Seattle by now. Just making sure Mom and Dad are settled in their new place. Great, great. Hey, Mom, Dad, how are you liking the apartment? Much easier to manage than that big old house, right? Mom's voice was small. It's different. Danny turned to me with that same smug expression. You know, Mikey, I'm glad you're here. Maybe you can help them understand that this is really for the best. The house was getting to be too much for them. This way, they don't have to worry about maintenance, property taxes, any of that stuff. About those property taxes, I said casually. How much were they? I might be able to help Mom and Dad with their finances while they adjust to the new living situation. Oh, you don't need to worry about that. I'll be taking care of all the house expenses from now on. In fact, I've got a year lined up already. Great offer, cash deal, should close next Friday. Dad looked up sharply. Buyer? You're selling the house? Danny's expression faltered for just a second. Well, yeah, Dad, we talked about this. The house is too big for you guys now and I need the money for my business. You understand, right? This way everyone wins. But, Dad's voice was confused, hurt. That's our house. We raised our family there. All our memories. Dad, you signed the papers. It's done. Danny's voice had an edge now. Look, I know change is hard, but this is what's best for everyone. The apartment is much more suitable for your situation. I watched my father's face crumble as the reality hit him. They hadn't just signed estate planning documents. They'd been tricked into giving away their home while they were still alive, and now it was being sold out from under them. Mom started crying again. Danny, we trusted you. We thought you were helping us plan for the future, not taking our house away. I am helping you. Danny's voice rose. You think I wanted to deal with all this legal stuff? You think this was easy for me? I'm trying to make sure you're taken care of while also getting my life back on track. The house was just sitting there and I've got debts to pay. Business opportunities I need to invest in. Gambling debts more likely, and failed investments in get-rich-quick schemes. What kind of business opportunities require you to steal your parents' house? I asked quietly. Danny whirled on me. Steal? Steal? I didn't steal anything. Everything was done legally. I've got all the paperwork, all properly notarized and filed. You can check the county records yourself, counselor. He pulled out his phone and started typing. In fact, let me save you the trouble. He showed me the screen, the county recorder's website showing the deed transfer. Recorded. But yesterday at 3:47 p.m. See, all legal and above board. Warranty deed, property transfer tax paid, everything filed correctly. I looked at the screen, then at my parents' devastated faces, then back at Danny's triumphant expression. You may be a lawyer, but this is my town. These are my connections. You can't touch me. That's when I smiled, really smiled for the first time since I'd gotten that phone call. Danny, I said, pulling out my own phone, let me show you something interesting. I opened my laptop right there in my parents' cramped apartment living room. Danny was still radiating confidence, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as I pulled up multiple browser windows. Let me start with your lawyer friend, Dave Morrison, I said, typing his name into the Ohio State Bar Association attorney lookup database. Interesting results here. The screen showed, "No attorney found with that name." Huh, that's weird, right? I mean, you'd think a licensed attorney would show up in the state bar database. I looked up at Danny, whose smug expression was starting to crack. Maybe he practices in a different state? I ran the search through Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Kentucky, all the neighboring states. Nothing. You know what, Danny? Let me try a different approach. I pulled out the deed documents he'd shown me earlier and spread them on the coffee table. Mind if I take a closer look at these with my professional eye? Anyone who's ever dealt with real estate fraud knows there are telltale signs to look for. Document authentication is like reading fingerprints. Once you know what to look for, forgeries practically glow in the dark. First thing, let's look at the notarization. I pointed to the notary seal at the bottom of the warranty deed. See this embossed seal? It's supposed to be unique to each notary, with specific registration numbers and expiration dates. I pulled up the Ohio Secretary of State Notary Verification database on my laptop. Let's see. Jennifer W. Alsh, commission number 47291. Interesting. The screen showed that Jennifer Walsh's notary commission had expired 18 months ago. That's a problem, Danny. A big problem. In Ohio, using an expired notary seal is a felony. But wait, it gets better. I examined the signature line more closely. The signature style doesn't match the exemplar signature on file with the state. See how the J in Jennifer is completely different, and the pen pressure is inconsistent. I could see sweat starting to form on Danny's forehead, but he kept his composure. Look, maybe there were some minor technical issues, but the intent was clear. Mom and Dad wanted to give me the house. Let's test that theory. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, do you remember meeting Jennifer Walsh, the notary? Mom shook her head. I don't think so. When we signed the papers at Danny's friend's office, there was just Dave and his secretary. I don't remember anyone named Jennifer. That's because Jennifer Walsh didn't notarize these documents, Danny. Someone forged her signature and used her expired seal. But here's the really interesting part. I pulled up another screen. The county recorder's filing system. See this timestamp? The deed was filed electronically at 3:47 p.m. yesterday. But look at the notarization date on the document itself. The notarization was dated 6 weeks ago, but the electronic signature logs showed the PDF had been created yesterday morning. This is what we call metadata evidence, Danny. Every electronic document carries invisible information about when it was created, modified, and saved. This deed was created yesterday morning on a computer registered to Danny Peterson. That's you. And then backdated to make it look like it was notarized 6 weeks ago. Danny's face had gone pale. That's not possible. Dave handled all the technical stuff. Dave who doesn't exist, you mean? The lawyer who isn't licensed in any state I can find. I opened another browser window. Let me show you something else interesting. For the past 8 months, I've had automated alerts set up through the county recorder's office for any property transactions involving your parents' address. Every filing, every change of ownership, every lien or mortgage modification. I showed them the email alerts on my phone dating back months. I got 17 different notifications yesterday as these fraudulent documents were being filed. I've been monitoring this property since last summer because I was worried about exactly this kind of situation. You've been spying on us? Danny's voice cracked. I've been protecting our parents. There's a difference. I pulled out a manila folder of my own. And that protection included documenting everything you've been doing. I spread out photographs, bank statements, and recorded phone call transcripts. Bank withdrawals from Mom and Dad's account that they don't remember authorizing. Signatures that don't match their handwriting exemplars. Conversations where you coach them on what to say to bank tellers. I'd been building this case for months, ever since I noticed the pattern of Danny's visits increasing and my parents' confusion about their finances growing. Every suspicious transaction, every forged signature, every lie. I documented it all. But most importantly, I said, pulling out a small digital recorder, I've been recording every conversation since I arrived yesterday, including the one we had at the house where you admitted to forging these documents. I never admitted to forging anything. I hit play on the recorder. Danny's voice came through clearly. My lawyer friend Dave Morrison handled all the paperwork. Already got a buyer lined up. Cash deal, closing next Friday. I fast-forwarded. The house was just sitting there and I've got debts to pay. Danny's real voice. Ice overlapped with his recorded voice. That doesn't prove anything. You're right, it doesn't prove anything by itself. But combined with the forged notarization, the non-existent lawyer, the fraudulent filing dates, and the pattern of financial elder abuse I've been documenting for months. I smiled at him. Well, that's what we call a federal case, Danny. My parents were staring at both of us, trying to process what they were hearing. Dad spoke first. Michael, are you saying Danny lied to us? That we didn't really sign away the house? Dad, you were tricked into signing documents that weren't what Danny claimed they were. But more importantly, those documents are legally worthless because they were forged, falsely notarized, and fraudulently filed. Danny was starting to panic now. Look, maybe there were some mistakes in the paperwork, but the intent was clear. Mom and Dad agreed to let me handle their affairs. They wanted me to have the house eventually anyway. Eventually maybe, but not now and not through fraud. I closed my laptop and looked directly at my brother. Danny, you made one crucial mistake. You assumed I was just watching from far away, too busy with my own life to pay attention to what was happening here. I stood up and walked over to where he was sitting. I wasn't just watching, Danny. I was preparing. That night back in my hotel room, I spread everything out on the bed like a battle plan. 8 months of documentation, evidence logs, witness statements, and financial records. What I'd been telling my family was only the tip of the iceberg. Let me explain how you actually build an elder abuse case, because this is information that could protect your own parents someday. Are you taking notes? Elder financial abuse isn't usually one big theft. It's a pattern of smaller violations that build up over time. The key to proving it is documentation. Every transaction, every conversation, every suspicious document needs to be preserved and cataloged. I'd started getting suspicious last summer when my mother mentioned that Danny had been helping them with their paperwork. In elder abuse cases, that's often code for someone is manipulating legal documents, so I'd quietly started investigating. First step, financial records. I'd used my power of attorney, the legitimate one my parents had given me years ago for emergency purposes, to request copies of all their bank statements for the past 2 years. What I found was a classic pattern of financial grooming. Small withdrawals at first, $200 here, $500 there. Always amounts that wouldn't trigger fraud alerts. Danny had convinced my parents to add him to their checking account for emergencies, which gave him legal access to their money. But the pattern of withdrawals corresponded exactly with his gambling debts and failed business ventures. Then there were the signature discrepancies. I'd collected exemplars of my parents' signatures from birthday cards, Christmas cards, and official documents dating back years. The signatures on the bank withdrawal slips were close, but not exact. Pressure points were different. Letter formation was slightly off. Someone had been practicing forging their signatures. Next, property records monitoring. This is something anyone can do. Most county recorder offices have online databases where you can set up alerts for specific addresses. Every time a document gets filed related to that property, you get an email notification. Liens, mortgages, deed transfers, easements, everything. I'd been getting routine notifications for months. Property tax assessments, routine filings. But yesterday my phone had exploded with alerts. Warranty deed transfer, property transfer tax payment, mortgage satisfaction, title insurance filing. Someone was preparing to sell my parents' house, and it wasn't my parents. The smoking gun was the digital forensics. Every computer file has metadata, invisible information about when it was created, who created it, what software was used, even what other files were open at the same time. The deed documents Danny had presented were created on Tuesday morning on a computer registered to him, using a pirated copy of Adobe Acrobat. But here's the really damning part. The metadata showed that a file called practicesignatures.pdf had been open in another window while the deed was being created. I'd subpoenaed Danny's computer records through a pre-litigation discovery motion, a legal maneuver that lets you gather evidence before formally filing charges. I pulled up the timeline I'd been building. March 2023. Danny added to parents' checking account, June 2023. First suspicious withdrawals begin, August 2023. I start monitoring property records, October 2023. Large withdrawal, $8,500, corresponding with Danny's gambling debts, December 2023. Parents mention lawyer friend, helping with paperwork, February 2024. Practice signature documents created on Danny's computer, March 12, 2024. Fraudulent deed documents created and filed. The pattern was clear, methodical, and absolutely criminal. But I hadn't just been gathering evidence. I'd been building a legal strategy. Elder abuse cases require both criminal and civil remedies. The criminal side would put Danny in prison and establish the fraud for the record. The civil side would restore my parents' property and ensure their financial security. I'd already drafted the initial pleadings, emergency motion for preliminary injunction to stop the house sale, petition for criminal charges including elder abuse and property fraud, and civil complaint for damages and restitution. All ready to file first thing in the morning. My phone rang. It was Danny. Michael, look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot today. I think there might be some misunderstandings about the paperwork. Maybe we could work something out. I put the phone on speaker and started recording. What kind of misunderstandings, Danny? Well, maybe some of the technical details weren't perfect, but the important thing is that Mom and Dad are taken care of, right? And I really do need this money for my business. Maybe there's a way we could restructure things so everyone's happy. What kind of restructuring did you have in mind? Well, what if I gave them a percentage of the sale proceeds? Like maybe they could keep 30% and I could keep 70%. That way they'd have some money for their retirement and I could pay off my debts and get my business going. Bingo. He'd just admitted on a recorded line that he'd defrauded them of their house and was now trying to negotiate how much of their own money he'd let them keep. That's generous of you, Danny. What about the legal problems with the paperwork? Look, maybe my lawyer friend made some mistakes, but we could fix all that, right? Get everything properly notarized and filed, make it all legitimate. So you're admitting the current documents are not legitimate? There was a long pause. I'm saying maybe there were some technical issues that could be corrected. I had enough. Danny, here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft. I'm also filing for an emergency injunction to stop the sale of the house and restore it to Mom and Dad's ownership. I have 8 months of evidence, recorded confessions, and expert analysis of your forged documents. You can't do that. I'm family. That's exactly why I can do it, and exactly why I will. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Danny's voice came back, and all the false charm was gone. Michael, you're making a big mistake. This is a small town. I have connections here, people who owe me favors. Accidents happen to people who don't mind. Their business. I smiled in my empty hotel room. He'd just added criminal intimidation to his growing list of charges. Thanks for that, Danny. I'll add it to the evidence file. Thursday morning, 8:47 a.m. I was standing in the lobby of the Cuyahoga County Courthouse with a briefcase full of evidence and a legal strategy that had been 8 months in the making. But before I filed the formal charges, I needed Danny to make one more mistake. This is how you protect elderly parents from predators. You use their desperation against them. I'd spent the night coordinating with 3 different agencies: the County Prosecutor's Office, the State Attorney General's Elder Abuse Division, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. When elder abuse crosses state lines, which it had since I was involved from Seattle, it becomes a federal matter. But I needed more evidence of Danny's criminal enterprise. The forgery and fraud were clear, but I suspected there were other victims, other schemes. Predators like Danny don't usually limit themselves to one target. I called him at 9:15 a.m. Danny, it's Michael. I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Maybe there's a way to work this out without involving the courts. Really? The relief in his voice was palpable. I told you, this is all just a misunderstanding. We're family. We should be able to figure this out. Here's what I'm thinking. You mentioned you had a buyer lined up for the house. What if we let that sale go through but put the proceeds in an escrow account until we can sort out the legal issues? That could work. Yeah, that makes sense. The closing is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Perfect. Who's handling the closing? Dave Morrison's office. He's got everything set up with the title company. Of course he did. The non-existent lawyer was handling the fraudulent closing. Danny, I need to ask why. How something, and I need you to be straight with me. Are there any other legal issues I should know about? Any other debts or problems that might complicate this? There was a pause. Then Danny started talking, and I realized he was much deeper in criminal activity than I'd suspected. Well, there might be a few other things, nothing major, just some business deals that didn't work out exactly as planned. What kind of business deals? You remember the Hendersons, couple blocks over from Mom and Dad? Old Mr. Henderson died last year and his widow was having trouble managing the finances. I've been helping her out with some paperwork. My blood ran cold. What kind of paperwork, Danny? Just, estate planning stuff. Making sure her affairs are in order. She's getting pretty confused these days, so I've been handling some of her banking and bill paying. Another victim. Anyone else you've been helping with paperwork? Well, there's Mrs. Chen down at the end of Maple Street. Her son lives in California. Never visits, never calls. Someone needs to look out for these old folks, 3 victims that I knew of. Probably more. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was a systematic operation targeting elderly people in the neighborhood. Danny, here's what we're going to do. I want you to bring all the paperwork for all these cases to the closing tomorrow, everything together so I can review it all at once and make sure there are no other legal complications. Are you sure? I mean, some of it might be confusing. Trust me, I'll figure it out. Can you meet me at the title company an hour before the scheduled closing, say 1 p.m.? Yeah, okay, that works. And Danny, bring Dave Morrison with you. I'd like to meet this lawyer friend of yours. After I hung up, I immediately called Detective Sarah Chen with the county sheriff's office. Yes, the same last name as one of Danny's victims, her grandmother, as it turned out. Detective Chen, this is Michael Peterson. We spoke yesterday about my brother's elder abuse. Case. Right, the property fraud case. What's the update? He just confessed to running a multi-victim scheme targeting elderly residents. He's agreed to bring all the evidence to a meeting tomorrow at 1 p.m. I need law enforcement there when he shows up. Where's the meeting? Midwest Title Company, 847 Main Street. Conference Room B. He thinks he's coming to a legitimate closing, but he's actually walking into a trap. We'll be there. How many victims are we talking about? At least 3 that he's admitted to, probably more. And detective? He threatened me last night. Criminal intimidation. I have it recorded. That adds another charge to the list. Anything else? Yeah. He's bringing his fake lawyer to the meeting. The guy who's been helping him forge documents and defraud elderly people. 2 birds, 1 stone. Friday afternoon, 12:45 p.m. I was sitting in the title company conference room with Detective Chen, Assistant District Attorney Maria Rodriguez, and FBI Special Agent Tom Bradley. The conference room had recording equipment set up, and we had plainclothes officers stationed outside. Danny walked in at exactly 1 p.m., carrying 2 banker's boxes full of documents and looking nervous but confident. Behind him was a thin, nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who I assumed was the infamous Dave Morrison. Michael, good to see you, brother. This is Dave, my lawyer friend I've been telling you about. I shook hands with both of them while the recording equipment captured every word. Dave, nice to finally meet you. I looked you up in the state bar directory, but I couldn't find your listing. Which law school did you attend? Dave's face went white. Oh, I practice more on the consulting side. Business advice, document preparation, not technically practicing law per se. So you're not a licensed attorney? Well, not in the traditional sense. Danny jumped in. Look, Dave's been really helpful with all the paperwork. He knows how to get things done, you know. I'm sure he does. I gestured to the boxes. Is this all the documentation for the various cases you've been working on? Yeah, everything's there. The Henderson estate, Mrs. Chen's affairs, mom and dad's stuff, all organized and ready for review. For the next 30 minutes, Danny and his fake lawyer walked me through a systematic elder abuse operation that had defrauded at least 6 elderly victims out of more than $200,000 in cash and property. They thought they were impressing me with their efficiency and organization. They were actually confessing to multiple felonies on tape. At 1:35 p.m., Detective Chen stood up and identified herself. Danny Peterson and David Morrison, you're both under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. The look on Danny's face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building this case. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Danny looked at me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You set me up. You're my brother. No, Danny, I'm mom and dad's son. There's a difference. The arraignment was scheduled for Monday morning, but by Sunday afternoon, the entire scope of Danny's operation had become clear. What we'd uncovered wasn't just family theft, it was a sophisticated elder abuse ring that had been operating in our hometown for over 2 years. Let me walk you through exactly what happened when the authorities got involved, because this is how justice actually works when you build a proper case. First, the search warrant. Based on the evidence I'd provided and Danny's recorded confessions, investigators obtained warrants for his home, his computer, his bank records, and his phone record. What they found was a masterclass in financial predation. Danny's computer contained detailed files on 17 different elderly victims. Names, addresses, family situations, financial information, and psychological profiles. He'd been systematically identifying isolated elderly people in the community and targeting them based on their vulnerability. The Henderson file showed how the operation worked. Mrs. Henderson, 78 years old, had lost her husband 6 months ago. Danny had approached her at the funeral, offering to help with estate paperwork. Over the course of 4 months, he'd convinced her to sign over power of attorney, transfer ownership of her late husband's classic car collection, and liquidate $47,000 in savings bonds. Mrs. Chen's file was even worse. Danny had been systematically draining her accounts for 8 months while convincing her that her son in California was trying to steal her money. He'd isolated her from her family and convinced her that he was the only person she could trust. The fake lawyer, David Morrison, whose real name was David Miller, wasn't just helping with document forgery. He was running a parallel operation selling fake legal services to elderly people who couldn't afford real attorneys. Together, they'd created a network of financial elder abuse that stretched across 3 counties. But here's what really showed the scope of their operation: the recording. Danny had been secretly recording conversations with his victims, not to protect himself legally, but to study their psychology and refine his manipulation techniques. Hours and hours of audio files where he coached elderly people into signing documents they didn't understand, convinced them to distrust their own families, and gradually isolated them from anyone who might question his motives. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit traced the money through a complex web of bank accounts, shell companies, and cash transactions. Danny hadn't just stolen from elderly people. He'd laundered the money through fake business entities and used it to fund a gambling operation that extended into organized crime. By Tuesday, the local news had picked up the story. Local man arrested in elder abuse ring. By Wednesday, it was regional news. By Friday, it had gone national because the scope of the operation was so extensive and the evidence was so detailed. But the real vindication came Thursday morning when I got a call from Detective Chen. "Michael, you need to get down to the courthouse. Your brother wants to make a deal." Danny was in the county jail, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a week. The cocky, charismatic older brother was gone. In his place was a broken man who finally understood the full weight of what he'd done. His public defender, a competent attorney named Jennifer Walsh, yes, the same name as the notary whose seal he'd forged, had explained his legal situation. He was facing federal charges that carried a potential sentence of 25 years to life. Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, money laundering, conspiracy, criminal intimidation, and racketeering. He wants to plead guilty in exchange for cooperation with the ongoing investigation, she explained. Full restitution to all victims, forfeiture of all assets, and testimony against his co-conspirators. I looked across the table at Danny. "What about Mom and Dad's house?" "Already handled," Detective Chen said. "Emergency court order yesterday restored full ownership to your parents. The fraudulent deed has been nullified and the sale has been canceled. They can move back home whenever they're ready." Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "Michael, I know you probably hate me right now, but I need you to know. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just trying to solve some financial problems, and then it just spiraled. Danny, you didn't just steal money. You destroyed people's sense of security. You made elderly people afraid of their own families. You turned their golden years into a nightmare of confusion and fear. I know, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." The plea deal was finalized Friday afternoon. Danny would serve 12 years in federal prison, pay full restitution to all victims, and forfeit every asset he'd acquired through the scheme. David Miller got 8 years and similar restitution requirements. But more importantly, the investigation led to the recovery of over $340,000 in stolen assets and the identification of 23 elderly victims across 3 states. Every single victim would receive full restitution, and new protective measures would be put in place to prevent similar schemes. That evening, I drove to Sunset Manor Apartments to pick up my parents. Mom was standing by the window with 2 suitcases waiting for me. Dad was in his chair, but this time he was smiling. "Ready to go home?" I asked. "More than ready," Mom said. "Michael, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been watching out for us." "That's what family does, Mom. We protect each other." As we pulled into the driveway at 1247 Maple Street, I could see tears in Mom's eyes. The house looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. The locks had been changed, the title was secure, and most importantly, my parents knew they were safe. But the story doesn't end with my brother in handcuffs. It ends with what happened next. 6 months later, I was sitting at the kitchen table in the house where I grew up, reviewing the final restitution payments and legal documents that would close out Danny's case. But more importantly, I was home. I'd made the decision to relocate my practice back to Ohio, not to the small town where I grew up, but to Cleveland, where I could continue specializing in elder abuse cases while being close enough to visit my parents regularly. The past year had taught me that career success means nothing if you lose the people who matter most. My parents were thriving. Dad's memory seemed sharper now that he wasn't constantly stressed about finances and manipulative family members. Mom had returned to her garden club and was volunteering with a local organization that helped elderly people identify and report financial abuse. The house itself had been transformed into something more than just their home. It had become a symbol of what's possible when families work together to protect each other. "Michael," Mom said, bringing me a cup of coffee, "I got a call today from Mrs. Henderson. She wanted to thank you again for helping her get her husband's car collection back." Mrs. Henderson had become something of a spokesperson for elder abuse prevention. Her story and her recovery had inspired the county to create a new elder protection unit with dedicated prosecutors and investigators. "She's doing well? Better than well. She's got her family back, her finances are secure, and she's helping other seniors learn how to protect themselves. She said something beautiful yesterday. She said Danny may have stolen her money, but you helped her get her dignity back. That's what this whole experience had taught me about justice. It's not just about punishment or revenge. It's about restoration, restoring what was stolen, restoring relationships, and restoring people's faith that the system can work when good people stand up for what's right." My phone rang. It was Detective Chen. "Michael, we just got word on the final victim recovery. Mrs. Chen, my grandmother, just received her last restitution payment. 100% recovery of stolen assets plus interest and damages. How's she doing?" "She's doing great. She's back in touch with all her family, her finances are secure, and she's learned to spot the warning signs if anyone ever tries to take advantage of her again. She asked me to tell you something." "Yeek. What's that?" "She said, yeek. Tell that young lawyer that he didn't just save our money, he saved our faith and family." The broader impact of the case had been significant. The investigation had led to new state legislation strengthening penalties for elder abuse and requiring additional training for law enforcement officers. The fake notary scheme had prompted changes in how notarizations are verified and recorded. Most importantly, the case had raised awareness about how financial elder abuse actually works and how families can protect themselves. I'd testified before the state legislature about the warning signs of elder abuse and the importance of monitoring elderly family members' financial activities, not out of distrust, but out of love and protection. This is how you protect the people you love. You pay attention. You document everything. You trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And you use every tool available, legal, financial, and technological, to keep predators away from vulnerable family members. I'd also started a small foundation using part of the recovered assets that victims had donated back to help other families dealing with elder abuse. We provided free legal consultations, helped families set up monitoring systems for elderly relatives, and trained people to spot the warning signs of financial manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Danny had thought he was so clever, targeting isolated elderly people who didn't have family support, but he'd overlooked the fact that they did have support. They just didn't know it yet. Every victim in his scheme now had a network of people watching out for them, checking on them, and making sure they were never vulnerable to predators again. As for Danny himself, he was serving his sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania. I'd visited him once, about 3 months after his sentencing. He looked healthier, cleaner, and for the first time in years, honest. "Michael, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. But I want you to know that every day in here, I think about what I did to those people. What I did to Mom and Dad, what I did to our family. What are you going to do when you get out?" I've been working with the prison's financial literacy program, helping other inmates understand how debt and addiction can lead to really bad decisions. It's not much, but it's something. And when I get out, I don't know. Maybe I can find a way to help people instead of hurting them. I didn't forgive him. I'm not sure I ever will. But I stopped hating him. Hate takes too much energy, and I had better things to do with my life. The real victory was watching my parents reclaim their confidence and independence. They were careful now, but not paranoid, informed, but not isolated. They'd learned to ask questions, verify information, and trust their instincts. Most importantly, they'd learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. As I finished reviewing the last of the legal documents that Friday evening, Dad shuffled into the kitchen. "Son, I want to thank you for something." "What's that, Dad?" "For never giving up on us. For paying attention when we didn't even know we needed help. For being the kind of man your mother and I always hoped you'd become." He paused, looking out the window at Mom's rebuilt flower garden. "And for showing us that family means protecting each other, not taking advantage of each other." That night, as I drove back to my apartment in Cleveland, I thought about the difference between the two kinds of family members, the ones who protect and the ones who prey. Danny had chosen to be a predator. I'd chosen to be a protector. My mother still lives in that house on Maple Street. The deed is secure, the title is clear, and the locks have been changed, but more importantly, she knows she's safe. She knows someone is watching out for her. She knows that family, real family, means never having to face the predators alone. And my brother? Well, let's just say that federal prison gives you plenty of time to think about your choices. He's got about 11 more years to figure out what kind of person he wants to be when he gets out. But that's his story to write now. Mine is about coming home, protecting the people I love, and making sure that what happened to my family never happens to another family if I can prevent it. Because in the end, that's what justice really looks like. Not revenge, not punishment, but protection. Making sure the good guys win, the bad guys face consequences, and the vulnerable people in our communities know that someone is watching out for them. That's a story worth telling. And more importantly, it's a life worth living. If you've enjoyed this story, please consider sharing it with others who might be dealing with similar family situations. Elder abuse is more common than most people realize, but it's also preventable when families work together and stay vigilant. The warning signs are real, the protective measures work, and justice is possible when good people stand up for what's right. Most importantly, remember this. If something feels wrong with an elderly family member's financial situation, trust your instincts, document everything, ask questions, and don't be afraid to get professional help. The predators count on silence and isolation. Don't give them what they want. Take care of each other out there. And remember, family means protection, not predation.